Some people die from bullets, others from betrayal. But Evelyn Carter was dying from something far quieter: invisibility. On the coldest New Year's Eve Manhattan had seen in decades, she made a choice that would shatter everything. Stay late for a man who never saw her, or finally choose herself. She chose wrong. And when the blizzard hit, when her body began to fail in the frozen streets, a monster in a $1,000 suit would tear apart the night searching for her. This is their story. A love born in ice and blood, where salvation came from the last man who should have cared. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop a comment below and hit that like button. I want to see how far Evelyn and Adrian's story travels across the world. The fluorescent lights of Voss Enterprises hummed with the kind of sterile persistence that made time feel infinite. Evelyn Carter's fingers moved across the keyboard in mechanical rhythm, her eyes burning from 12 straight hours of staring at spreadsheets that blurred together like watercolors in rain. Around her, the 54th floor stretched empty and silent, a ghost ship of glass and steel sailing through the Manhattan night. She didn't need to look at the clock to know it was past 11. The city's New Year's Eve celebration had already begun without her, fireworks testing their trajectory across the winter sky, their muffled pops reaching her like distant gunfire. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the glittering chaos of Times Square 12 blocks south, a carnival of light and life that might as well have existed on another planet. Evelyn had stopped being invited to planets like that 3 years ago. Just finish the quarterly projections, she whispered to herself, echoing the note Adrian Voss had left on her desk that morning. Not asked, not requested, but stated with the casual certainty of a man who had never heard the word no, and wouldn't recognize it if he did. He needs them first thing in the new year. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. Adrian Voss probably didn't need anything from her tonight. He certainly wasn't thinking about her as he undoubtedly celebrated somewhere with people who mattered. People who wore designer clothes that fit properly, who knew which fork to use at galas, who understood that power was a language and they were native speakers. People who were visible. Evelyn pressed her palms against her eyes until colors bloomed in the darkness. When had she become this? When had she transformed from a woman with dreams and friends and a life into a shadow that existed only in the margins of someone else's empire? She knew the answer. She'd known it for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The day Adrian Voss had looked at her for the first time. Not looked through her, or past her, or at the report she carried, but actually at her. Those steel gray eyes focusing with an intensity that had made her breath catch, made her feel like every cell in her body had suddenly woken from a long sleep and remembered what it meant to be alive. "You're Evelyn," he'd said, and the way her name sounded in that voice, a rough velvet over iron, had rewired something fundamental in her brain chemistry. "Yes, Mr. Voss." "Yeah, you've been with the company how long?" 6 months, sir." He'd studied her for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. "You notice things other people miss." It hadn't been a question, but she'd answered anyway. "I try to be thorough." Thorough. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "My last assistant missed a decimal point that cost me $40 million. You caught 3 of them in your first week." He'd leaned back in his chair, a king on a throne made of other people's failures. "You're wasted in the general pool. Starting Monday, you work directly for me." That should have been her first warning. Adrian Voss didn't promote people out of kindness. He acquired assets, useful tools, things that served a purpose in the complex machine of his empire. She'd been too dazzled to care, too hungry for the validation of being seen by someone who mattered, too desperate to prove she was more than the overlooked middle child from a family that had perfected the art of benign neglect, more than the girlfriend whose ex had left her for someone more exciting, more than the invisible girl who'd learned to make herself small because taking up space had always ended in disappointment. Adrian Voss had seen her, had chosen her, and she'd spent 3 years trying to be worthy of that choice, working longer hours, accepting impossible tasks, saying yes when sanity demanded no, slowly erasing every part of herself that existed outside his orbit until there was nothing left but this. A woman alone in an empty office on New Year's Eve, finishing work that probably wasn't even urgent because she had nowhere else to be. Evelyn saved the final spreadsheet and closed her laptop with a click that echoed through the silence. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window. a pale ghost in a wrinkled blouse, brown hair escaping from a bun that had given up hours ago, dark circles under eyes that had forgotten how to see anything but numbers and deadlines, and the impossible standard of perfection Adrian Voss demanded from everything in his world. Including you, a bitter voice whispered in her mind. Especially you. She gathered her things with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned not to make noise, not to draw attention, not to exist loudly enough to disturb the important people. Her coat was 3 years old, bought during a rare moment of optimism when she'd thought working for Adrian might lead somewhere beyond this hamster wheel of diminishing returns. Her boots had a worn spot on the heel. Her scarf was a birthday gift from her mother, who called twice a year and always forgot whether Evelyn was 29 or 31. The elevator descended in silence, numbers ticking backward like her life in reverse. 54, 43, 32, 21. Each floor a reminder of how high she'd climbed and how far she had to fall. The lobby was deserted except for Marcus, the night security guard, who looked up from his phone with genuine surprise. "Ms. Carter? You're still here?" "Just leaving," she said, managing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Happy New Year, Marcus." "You too." He frowned at the windows, where snow had begun to fall in thick, aggressive flakes. "Weather's getting bad. They're saying this storm's going to be worse than predicted. You got someone picking you up?" The question hit harder than it should have. "I'll catch a cab." "Might want to hurry. They're saying the subways might shut down. And if the cabs can't run..." He shrugged apologetically, as if the weather were his fault. Evelyn nodded and pushed through the revolving doors into a world transformed. The snow that had been a picturesque backdrop through the office windows was a living thing at street level, a swirling, vicious entity that immediately found every gap in her coat, every exposed inch of skin, every vulnerability in her inadequate armor against the elements. The wind didn't blow so much as attack, driving ice crystals into her face with enough force to make her gasp. "Jesus," she breathed, and the word crystallized instantly in the air before being torn away. The street was already disappearing under a white blanket, the usual Manhattan chaos of traffic and noise muffled into an eerie, otherworldly quiet. A few desperate taxis crawled past, their off-duty lights blazing like warnings. A group of people in glittering party clothes shrieked and laughed as they stumbled toward a bar, drunk enough to find the blizzard entertaining rather than threatening. Evelyn pulled out her phone with shaking fingers, the screen immediately collecting snowflakes like a desperate cry for help. The rideshare app showed no available cars. The taxi app timed out. The subway notification flashed red. Severe delays on all lines. Service suspension likely. She stood there, a statue slowly being buried, and felt the first whisper of real fear. Her apartment was 40 blocks north. Walkable on a normal night, but in this? In boots with worn heels and a coat designed for autumn rather than Arctic assault? With visibility dropping to maybe 20 feet and the temperature plummeting towards something that could kill an unprepared person in less than an hour? "You should have left earlier," the voice in her head whispered. "You should have been anywhere but here." But she hadn't been. She'd been proving her worth to a man who wouldn't notice her absence, wouldn't think about whether she made it home safely, wouldn't spare her a single thought as he rang in the new year with people who mattered. Evelyn started walking. The first 10 blocks were merely miserable. Her feet went numb inside her boots. Her hands, even buried in her pockets, lost feeling in the fingertips. The snow found ways into her collar, down her back, soaking through her tights until her legs felt like marble columns. Cold, heavy, inflexible. But she kept moving because stopping meant giving up. And Evelyn Carter had spent her entire life refusing to give up, even when giving up would have been the merciful choice, even when perseverance was just another word for stubborn self-destruction. By block 15, the streets had emptied completely. The party people had found shelter. The taxis had vanished. Even the homeless population that usually occupied these corners had retreated to whatever havens they'd secured against the storm. She was alone in a city of 8 million people, invisible even to the night itself. Her phone died at block 23. The fear that had been a whisper became a scream. Evelyn stumbled, her numb feet betraying her on a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. She caught herself against a building, the brick rough even through her gloves, and tried to think through the fog settling over her mind. How long have I been walking? 30 minutes? An hour? Time had become elastic, stretching and compressing until she couldn't trust her own perception. The cold was doing something to her thoughts, making them slow and thick, like trying to think through honey. This is bad. This is really bad. But what choice did she have? She couldn't go back. Voss Enterprises would be locked down. Marcus probably gone by now. She couldn't shelter in a doorway. She'd read the articles about people dying from exposure 20 feet from help because they just stopped moving. She had to keep going, had to reach home, had to survive this stupid, preventable crisis that was entirely her own fault. The wind hit her like a physical blow, and this time when she stumbled, she went down. The snow was surprisingly soft, almost welcoming, like a bed after an exhausting day, inviting her to just rest for a moment, to close her eyes and let the world fade away. No. Evelyn forced herself to her knees, then to her feet, swaying like a drunk. Her coat was soaked through now, worse than useless, an icy shell that was actively stealing what little heat her body still produced. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, tasted blood. Move. Just move. One foot in front of the other. Don't think about how far. Don't think about the cold. Don't think about dying alone in the street like you lived, invisible and unimportant. She made it another 3 blocks before her body simply refused to cooperate anymore. This time when she fell, she didn't get up. The snow continued to fall, indifferent to the woman it was slowly burying. In the distance, the muffled sound of the city's celebration continued. Midnight approaching. A new year about to begin. Hope and champagne and kisses shared between people who mattered to each other. Evelyn's eyes drifted closed. She thought about her mother, who would take 3 days to notice the unreturned calls. Her father, who taught her that love was conditional and worth was something you had to earn with every breath. Her sister, who'd always been the pretty one, the successful one, the one who knew how to be a person instead of a ghost. She thought about Adrian Voss, whose approval she'd chased like an addict, who'd never asked her to destroy herself for him because he'd never had to. She'd done it voluntarily, eagerly, pathetically. I'm going to die, she realized with a strange, distant calm. I'm going to die, having never been anything but background noise in other people's lives. The darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, warm and gentle and kind in a way the world had never been. And that's when she heard it. A voice cutting through the storm like a blade through silk, rough, desperate, afraid. Evelyn, 12 hours earlier. Adrian Voss had built his empire on the principle that fear was more reliable than loyalty, and both were more useful than love. At 42, he commanded a network of legitimate businesses that generated billions while serving as perfect cover for operations that existed in the profitable shadows between legal and lethal. He was not a good man. He'd stopped pretending to be one around the same time he'd stopped counting bodies. But he was effective, disciplined, controlled. At least he had been until Evelyn Carter walked into his life and shattered every defense he'd spent decades perfecting. Mr. Voss, the contracts from the Meridian deal are ready for your signature. His current meeting droned on, the lawyer's voice a monotonous buzz that Adrian only half heard. His attention kept drifting to the outer office, where Evelyn sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the focused intensity she brought to everything. She had no idea how distracting she was, no concept of how often he found excuses to call her into his office just to hear her voice, to watch the way she chewed her bottom lip when she was thinking, to observe the small crease that appeared between her eyebrows when she was solving a problem. Mr. Voss? Adrian dragged his attention back to the meeting. The Meridian deal is a front for the waterfront acquisition. I don't sign anything until I know the City Planning Commission is properly motivated to see things our way. Of course, Chen is handling the necessary conversations. Translation: bribes, blackmail, or whatever tools Chen deemed appropriate to ensure that the Planning Commission approved construction on property Adrian had secured through methods that wouldn't survive legal scrutiny. This was his world. Power consolidated through intimidation and violence. Wealth built on the backs of people who served as stepping stones. An empire held together by the understanding that crossing Adrian Voss was a mistake no one made twice. He should have felt nothing about it. Guilt was for people who had the luxury of conscience. But lately, watching Evelyn work with that earnest dedication, that belief in the value of doing things right even when no one was watching, Something uncomfortable had begun festering in his chest. "She doesn't know what you are," the voice whispered. "She thinks you're just a ruthless businessman. She has no idea about the bodies. The blood. The empire built on fear." He silenced the voice the way he always did, by reminding himself that Evelyn was his employee, nothing more. That this awareness of her was just a professional appreciation of competence. That the way his chest tightened when she smiled had nothing to do with feelings he'd carved out of himself years ago. The meeting concluded. Adrian signed the contracts he needed to sign, made the threats he needed to make, and dismissed everyone with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never doubted his right to command. Alone in his office, he allowed himself a moment of weakness. He pulled up the security feed from the outer office on his computer, a habit he'd developed 6 months ago and couldn't seem to break. Evelyn was still at her desk, despite the late hour, despite the fact that he'd given her nothing urgent today. She worked because she always worked, because she'd somehow gotten the idea that her worth was measured in hours sacrificed and perfection achieved. "I did that to her," he realized with uncomfortable clarity. "I set that standard. I let her think that anything less than complete devotion was failure." His phone buzzed. Marcus Chen, his head of security and the closest thing Adrian had to a friend, though that word implied a softness their relationship didn't possess. "The weather's getting worse," Chen said without preamble. "The storm they predicted for tomorrow night is coming in early and hard. You should leave soon if you want to make it to the estate." Adrian had a New Year's party to attend, one of those tedious obligations where he had to play the civilized businessman for society types who smiled while calculating his net worth. He'd been planning to skip it, but his publicist had insisted it was necessary for maintaining his legitimate facade. "I'll leave within the hour," Adrian said, his eyes still on Evelyn's image. "Make sure the building is properly secured. Already on it. Most people left hours ago. Just a few stragglers finishing up." Adrian ended the call and made a decision he'd regret for the rest of his life. He didn't check if Evelyn was one of those stragglers. Didn't stop by her desk to tell her to go home. Didn't think about whether she had a safe way to travel in worsening conditions. He simply left, because acknowledging that he cared about her safety would mean acknowledging that he cared about her, and that was a weakness he couldn't afford. The estate was 40 miles north of the city, a sprawling property that served as both sanctuary and fortress. Adrian made it there just as the snow began to fall in earnest, the party already in full swing with people who laughed too loud and drank too much and didn't matter in any meaningful way. He played his role, smiled at the right moments, made small talk about market trends and philanthropic endeavors, and all the civilized lies that concealed what he really was. And the entire time, something gnawed at him. An unease that grew with each passing hour, each weather update that showed the storm intensifying beyond predictions, each moment that his mind, unbidden and unwelcome, returned to the image of Evelyn at her desk. "She's fine," he told himself. "She's a grown woman. She doesn't need you to protect her." But the gnawing didn't stop. At 11:30, he found himself in his private office, pulling up the building's security system on his laptop. The feed from the 54th floor showed Evelyn's desk empty, her computer off, no sign of her. Relief warred with something else. Disappointment that she'd already gone, that he couldn't see her even through a camera, that the last image of her for the day was just an empty chair. Then he checked the lobby footage, scrolling back through the evening, and his heart stopped. There. 10:47 p.m. Evelyn walking through the lobby, looking small and tired and unprepared for what waited outside. She spoke briefly to Marcus the guard, then pushed through the doors into a storm that had already transformed the city into something hostile and deadly. Adrian checked the timestamp. That was over an hour ago. He grabbed his phone, pulling up her contact, straight to voicemail. He tried again, same result. The gnawing became teeth, became claws, became a full-blown panic he hadn't felt since he couldn't remember. Maybe never. Maybe not in his entire carefully controlled life had he felt fear like this, cold and absolute and paralyzing. Chen. He had the phone to his ear without remembering dialing. "I need you to find someone." "Boss, the roads are—" "I don't care about the roads." "Evelyn Carter, my assistant. She left the office over an hour ago. Her phone's off. I need to know if she made it home." A pause. "You want me to check on an employee?" "I want you to find her. Now." Another pause. longer this time. Chen knew Adrian well enough to recognize the tone that meant, don't argue, don't question, just act. I'll make calls. But boss, if she's caught in this storm, if she's been out there for over an hour. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Adrian was already moving, grabbing his coat, his keys, ignoring the protests of his publicist as he strode toward the garage. Mr. Voss, you can't leave in this weather. Watch me. The Range Rover was equipped for harsh conditions. Four-wheel drive, winter tires, enough weight to handle the snow. But even so, the drive back toward Manhattan was a white-knuckled exercise in controlled terror. The highways were nearly empty, the few vehicles he passed were abandoned or in ditches, and visibility was measured in feet rather than yards. His phone rang. Chen. Her apartment building says she never made it home. Doorman knows her, says she always checks in with him. No sign of her. The fear crystallized into something sharp and cutting. How far is her apartment from the office? About 40 blocks, but Adrian, in these conditions, on foot. She was on foot? No ride apps operating, subways suspended. She would have had to walk. 40 blocks. In a blizzard. In inadequate clothing because Evelyn never spent money on herself. Never prioritized her own comfort. Never seemed to think she deserved basic things like a proper winter coat. Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. I'm going back to the office. I'll search the route to her apartment. That's insane. You'll never find one person in this. The city's shut down. Emergency services are suspended. You need to wait until... I'm not waiting. He ended the call and drove faster, the engine roaring defiance at the storm. Please, he thought, and didn't know who he was asking. Adrian Voss didn't believe in anything but himself, didn't pray, didn't hope, didn't let himself feel anything that could be used against him. But for Evelyn, for the woman who'd somehow slipped past every defense and made herself essential without him realizing it was happening, he'd begged the universe itself. Please let her be alive. Please let me find her. Please. The office building loomed out of the snow like a monument to his arrogance. He abandoned the Range Rover in the middle of the street and ran for the entrance, his expensive shoes slipping on ice, his coat inadequate against the storm's fury. The lobby was empty. Dark. He used his key card, took the stairs because the elevators felt too slow, reached the 54th floor already knowing what he'd find. Nothing. Empty. No sign that anyone had been there except the ghost of her presence in the coffee cup still sitting on her desk. She was here, working late because I left that note, because I've conditioned her to sacrifice everything for me. The realization hit like a physical blow. This was his fault, all of it. He'd created a dynamic where she felt she had to prove her worth, had to stay late, had to push herself beyond reason because he'd never once told her she was enough exactly as she was. Adrian made it back to the lobby, back out into the storm, and started running. 40 blocks. He'd search every inch, every doorway, every alley, every place a person could fall and be swallowed by snow. The wind tried to push him back, the snow tried to blind him, the cold tried to stop him. He ignored it all. Evelyn! His voice tore from his throat, raw and desperate. Evelyn! Nothing but the wind's howl in response. Block after block, his fear grew into something monstrous. He passed huddled shapes that might have been homeless people or piles of trash. Saw abandoned cars and closed businesses, and a city that had given up trying to fight the elements. 20 blocks from the office, he found her scarf. It was caught on a street sign, the birthday gift from her mother that she'd mentioned once in passing, distinctive enough that he recognized it immediately. His hand shook as he pulled it free, the fabric frozen stiff. Evelyn! Louder now, more desperate. Evelyn, where are you? Block 23. He almost missed her. She was just a shape in the snow, a barely perceptible mound against a building's wall. If he'd been in a car, if he'd been moving faster, if the angle had been different, he would have walked right past. But something, instinct or desperation or the universe finally showing mercy, made him look twice. No. The word came out broken. No, no, no. Adrian dropped to his knees beside her, his hands finding her face beneath the snow. Her skin was ice, her lips were blue, her eyes were closed. For one infinite, terrible moment, he thought he was too late. Then she took a breath. Shallow. Barely there. but a breath. Relief hit him so hard he couldn't breathe himself. Evelyn. Evelyn, I've got you. Open your eyes. Nothing. He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her, knowing it was inadequate, knowing she needed heat and shelter and medical attention, knowing that time was measured in minutes now, and he had to move fast. Adrian Voss had carried broken bodies before, had disposed of people who'd crossed him, had lifted corpses into trunks and shallow graves in places they'd never be found. But lifting Evelyn felt different, sacred, terrifying. She was so light, so fragile, so utterly vulnerable in a way that made every instinct scream at him to protect, to save, to do whatever it took to keep her breathing. He held her against his chest and ran. The Range Rover was where he'd left it, already half buried. He got Evelyn into the passenger seat, cranked the heat to maximum, and started driving. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice harsh because if he softened it even slightly, it would break. "That's an order, Evelyn. You don't get to die. Not tonight. Not ever." Her head lolled against the seat. Her breathing remained shallow. But she was breathing. He couldn't take her to a hospital. Too many questions, too much attention, too much risk that someone would connect the dots and realize that Adrian Voss cared about someone, that he had a weakness that could be exploited. So he drove to the estate, calling ahead to have his private physician meet him there, and spent every second of that drive cataloging his failures. He'd failed to see her as more than an employee until it was nearly too late, failed to protect her from his own impossible standards, failed to tell her that she mattered, that she was seen, that she'd become essential in ways that had nothing to do with quarterly reports and everything to do with the way she made him feel human again. Adrian Voss had built an empire on ruthlessness and fear, but tonight, holding Evelyn Carter's unconscious form as he raced through a blizzard, he realized that empire meant nothing compared to the woman who'd somehow made him care about more than just power and control. Tonight, he'd failed the only test that actually mattered. And if she survived, if she opened her eyes again, if the universe granted him a mercy he didn't deserve, he swore he'd spend the rest of his life making sure she knew she was visible, that she was seen, that she was his. The estate's main house blazed with light when Adrian pulled up, tires skidding on the circular drive, now buried under 8 inches of fresh snow. He'd called ahead, terse, brutal commands that had sent staff scrambling, and the front doors flew open before he'd even killed the engine. Dr. Sarah Reeves stood waiting, her medical bag already in hand, her expression shifting from professional calm to shock when she saw what Adrian carried. "Guest room now," Adrian ordered, not breaking stride as he carried Evelyn up the steps. His arms burned with the effort of holding her, but he wouldn't have put her down for anything. Couldn't. As if letting go would sever the fragile thread keeping her tethered to life. "What happened?" Dr. Reeves followed him up the grand staircase, her footsteps quick and precise. "Hypothermia. She was outside for over an hour. Maybe longer. I don't know." The admission tasted like failure. "Fix her." "Mr. Voss, I said fix her." They reached the guest room, a space decorated with the impersonal elegance of a 5-star hotel, all neutral tones and expensive furniture that no one had ever actually lived among. Adrian laid Evelyn on the bed with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who knew him, his hands shaking as he pulled back. Her face was still too pale, her lips still that terrible blue. But her chest rose and fell. That shallow, precious breath continued. "Doctor." Reeves was already working, her hands efficient as she checked Evelyn's pulse, her pupils, the temperature of her extremities. "I need you to step back." "No." "Mr. Voss, I can't treat her with you hovering. Either you trust me to do my job or you find someone else." It was the kind of defiance that usually earned immediate consequences. Adrian Voss didn't tolerate challenges to his authority, didn't accept anything less than instant obedience. But Sarah Reeves had been patching up his people for 15 years, had removed bullets without asking questions, had falsified death certificates, had proven her loyalty in ways that made her irreplaceable. More than that, she was looking at Evelyn with the focused intensity of someone who understood that this patient mattered in a way others didn't. Adrian took 3 steps back. It felt like 3 miles. "We need to get her core temperature up gradually, doctor," Reeves said, already removing Evelyn's soaked coat, her ruined boots. "Too fast and we risk cardiac arrest. Too slow and we risk organ damage. Help me get these wet clothes off. They worked in tense silence. Adrian's jaw clenched so tight he thought his teeth might crack. Evelyn's clothes were frozen to her skin in places, the fabric crackling as they peeled it away. Underneath, her body was a landscape of damage, skin mottled with cold, fingers and toes dangerously pale, muscles rigid with the cold's grip. Frostbite on her fingers and toes, Dr. Reeves assessed. Moderate to severe. We'll know the full extent once circulation returns. Get those heated blankets. Adrian grabbed the blankets a staff member had brought, helping to wrap Evelyn in layers of warmth. Her body was so cold it seemed to absorb the heat without effect, a black hole of ice that wouldn't yield. Dr. Reeves started an IV, the needle finding a vein with practiced ease. Warm saline. Her blood needs warming from the inside, and we need to monitor her heart rate closely. Hypothermia can cause arrhythmia. Will she survive? The question came out rough, stripped of his usual control. Dr. Reeves didn't look up from adjusting the IV drip. I don't know. The next few hours are critical. If her core temperature rises steadily and we don't see cardiac complications, her chances are good. But there's always risk with this level of exposure. It wasn't the guarantee Adrian wanted, wasn't the certainty he demanded from every other aspect of his life. But it was honest, and right now, that was all he had. Everyone out, he said quietly. Except you, Doctor. The staff melted away like ghosts. The party downstairs had been canceled the moment he'd called from the road. Guests hastily ushered out into the storm, with apologies and generous compensation for their inconvenience. The estate was locked down now, every entrance secured, every employee aware that their employer's attention was focused entirely on the woman lying unconscious in the guest room. Adrian pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. Minutes crawled by like wounded animals. Doctor. Reeves worked with quiet efficiency, checking monitors, adjusting blankets, documenting vitals in a notebook with handwriting too precise to be natural. Talk to her, the doctor said after 20 minutes of silence. Adrian's eyes snapped to her. What? Talk to her. Some studies suggest that familiar voices can help stabilize patients in crisis. It can't hurt. She's unconscious. Unconscious doesn't mean unhearing, Doctor. Reeves gave him a look that said she knew exactly what she was asking. Besides, you need something to do besides sitting there radiating enough anxiety to power the eastern seaboard. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the fiction that this was just concern for a valuable employee, nothing more. But the fiction had shattered the moment he'd found her in the snow, and there was no piecing it back together. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and spoke to the unconscious woman who'd somehow become his entire world without him noticing. I should have checked on you, he said quietly. Should have made sure you left safely. Should have done 1,000 things differently. His hands clenched into fists. You stayed late because of that note I left. The quarterly projections. They weren't even urgent. I just wanted them done. And you always say yes. Always push yourself. Always try to be perfect. Evelyn's face remained still, unresponsive. I did that to you, Adrian continued, the words tasting like acid. Set that standard. Made you think you had to earn your place every single day. Made you invisible to yourself because I was too much of a coward to admit that I see you, that I've always seen you. Dr. Reeves glanced at him but said nothing, her attention seemingly focused on checking the monitors. 3 years, Adrian said. 3 years of watching you. Learning the way you take your coffee. The fact that you bite your lip when you're concentrating. That you apologize when other people bump into you. That you make yourself small because you think taking up space is a sin. His voice dropped lower, rough with emotion he'd spent decades suppressing. 3 years of wanting you and telling myself it was just professional admiration. That the way my chest tightened when you smiled meant nothing. That finding excuses to call you into my office was about efficiency, not about needing to hear your voice. He laughed bitterly. I built an empire on ruthlessness, and I couldn't even be honest with myself about one woman. The monitors beeped steadily. Dr. Reeves adjusted the IV drip. If you survive this, Adrian said, if you open your eyes again, I'm going to tell you the truth. All of it. What I am, what I've done, the empire I've built, and the bodies it's standing on. And then you'll run, because you should run, because I'm the last man you should ever trust. His jaw tightened, But I'll tell you anyway, because you deserve to know who you're working for. Who's been watching you? Who would burn this entire city down to keep you safe? Silence answered him. The storm outside howled against the windows, but inside the room, there was only the quiet beep of monitors and the sound of shallow breathing. Dr. Reeves checked her watch. Core temperature is rising, slowly but steadily. That's good. Her heart rate is stable. She met Adrian's eyes. She's fighting. That's a good sign. Adrian nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The hours crawled forward. Midnight came and went without fanfare. The new year arriving in silence rather than celebration. Somewhere in the world, people kissed and made promises they wouldn't keep, made resolutions that would fade by February, toasted to new beginnings with the comfortable certainty that tomorrow would look much like yesterday. But in this room, everything had changed. At 1:30 in the morning, Evelyn's fingers twitched. Adrian was on his feet instantly, leaning over the bed. Evelyn? Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Her breathing hitched, then steadied. That's normal, Dr. Reeves said, though her attention had sharpened. As her body warms, motor function returns. She might show signs of consciousness soon. How soon? Could be minutes, could be hours. Everyone responds differently to trauma. It was 17 minutes. Adrian had counted every second, his eyes locked on Evelyn's face, watching for any change, any sign that she was clawing her way back from the edge. When her eyes finally opened, they were unfocused at first, pupils dilated, gaze wandering across the ceiling without comprehension. Then they found him. Adrian? Her voice was barely a whisper, rough and confused. The sound of his name in that voice hit him like a physical blow. He'd heard her call him Mr. Voss 1,000 times, always professional, always maintaining that careful distance. But this was different, intimate, like she'd forgotten the walls between them. I'm here. He took her hand carefully, mindful of the frostbite damage. You're safe. You're at my estate. Confusion flickered across her face. The snow. I tried to make it home. I know. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the gentlest touch he could manage. You collapsed. I found you. She blinked slowly, trying to piece together information through what was clearly a fog of pain and medication. You came looking for me? Yes. Why? The question was so genuinely confused it nearly broke him. Dr. Reeves cleared her throat diplomatically. I'm going to step outside, give you two some privacy. Call if there are any changes. She left before Adrian could protest, the door clicking shut with quiet finality. Adrian looked down at Evelyn, at this woman who'd nearly died and couldn't understand why he'd care enough to save her, and felt something crack open in his chest. Because you matter, he said simply. Because the thought of you dying in the snow made me realize I've been lying to myself for 3 years. Because I see you, Evelyn. I've always seen you. Her eyes widened, pain and confusion giving way to something more complex. I don't understand. I know. He pulled the chair closer, still holding her hand. And I don't expect you to, not right now. You nearly froze to death. You're on pain medication. This isn't the time for confessions that will complicate everything. Then why say anything? Good question. The Adrian from yesterday would have maintained the lie, would have played the concerned employer, would have kept every feeling locked behind walls of control and denial. But the Adrian who'd run through a blizzard screaming her name couldn't go back to pretending. Because I almost lost you, he said quietly. And if tonight taught me anything, it's that lies of omission are still lies. You deserve better than my carefully maintained fiction. Evelyn's brow furrowed. What fiction? That you're just my assistant, that my interest in you is purely professional, that I haven't spent 3 years watching you and wanting you and telling myself it was nothing. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Evelyn stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been hope, if hope weren't such a dangerous thing. You want me? She said it like she was testing the words, trying to understand a language she'd never heard before. Yes. But you've never even looked at me like... She trailed off, shaking her head slightly. I'm nobody. I'm the assistant who stays late and says yes and never causes problems. I'm invisible. You're not invisible. The words came out harder than he intended. You've never been invisible. You're brilliant and dedicated and so goddamn determined to prove your worth to people who should have told you from day one that you're already enough. His hand tightened on hers, including me. Especially me. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. I don't understand. Why didn't you say something? Why let me think I was just background noise? Because I'm a coward, Adrian said bluntly. Because admitting I care about you means admitting I have a weakness. And in my world, weaknesses get exploited. People I care about become targets. Your world? The question was sharp despite her weakened state. And there it was. The moment of truth. The confession that would either bind them together or shatter whatever fragile thing had formed in this room. Adrian stood, releasing her hand, and walked to the window. Outside, the storm still raged, though with less fury than before. The sky was beginning to lighten, not sunrise yet, but the promise of it. A new year, a new beginning, or an ending. I'm not who you think I am, he said to the glass. The legitimate businesses you work for. They're real, but they're also cover. Beneath them is an empire built on things that would put me in prison if anyone could prove them. Smuggling, extortion, enforcement. He paused. Murder, when necessary. The silence behind him was absolute. I'm a criminal, Evelyn. The kind of man your mother warned you about. The kind who ruins people, who get in his way. He turned to face her, forcing himself to meet her eyes. And you've been working for me, trusting me, never knowing what I really am. Evelyn's face had gone pale again, but not from the cold this time. You're serious? Yes. Those business trips, the meetings with investors, the files you told me never to look at. She was piecing it together, her sharp mind working despite the trauma and medication. That's all criminal activity? Yes. And the people who work for you, Marcus Chen, Dr. Reeves, they're aware, complicit. Choose your terminology. She closed her eyes, her breath shaky. When she opened them again, they held something Adrian couldn't quite read. How many people have you killed? Directly? 4? Indirectly? He shrugged. I stopped counting. And you're telling me this why? To scare me? To make me run? To be honest with you, for the first time since we met. He moved back to the bed, sitting on the edge carefully. You asked why I came looking for you. Why I care. You deserve to know who's doing the caring, what it means to be seen by someone like me. It means I'm in danger. It wasn't a question. Potentially. If my enemies knew you mattered, they'd use you against me. That's why I kept my distance. Why I let you think you were just an employee. His voice roughened. But tonight proved that distance was an illusion. I was willing to risk everything to find you. And now anyone paying attention knows that Evelyn Carter matters to Adrian Voss. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something he wasn't sure he had to give. What happens now? That depends on you. Adrian forced himself to be still, to not reach for her, to let her make this choice without his influence. You can walk away. I'll make sure you're compensated generously, set you up with a new job, a new city if you want. You'll never have to see me again. Or you stay. You learn what my empire really is. You decide whether you can live with what I am. He paused. And I pursue what I've wanted for 3 years. Which is? You. The word hung between them, loaded with promise and threat in equal measure. Evelyn's hand lifted to touch her face, wincing as she discovered the damage the cold had done. I almost died tonight. I know. Because I stayed late to finish work that wasn't even urgent. Because I've spent 3 years making myself small and invisible and desperately trying to matter to you. Her voice cracked. And you're telling me I already mattered? That you wanted me but were too afraid to say anything? Yes. That's... She laughed, the sound bitter and broken. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. Adrian didn't flinch. I know. You let me think I was nothing. Let me sacrifice everything for approval you were never going to give. Let me nearly freeze to death because you couldn't be bothered to check if I got home safely. Tears streamed down her face now. And now you want me to what? Forgive you? Jump into your arms? Accept that you're a criminal and be okay with it? No. His voice was quiet. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I'm just telling you the truth because you deserve it. What you do with that truth is your choice. Evelyn turned her face away, her shoulders shaking. Adrian wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, to make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. But he stayed still, letting her process, letting her feel everything she needed to feel. When she finally looked back at him, her eyes were red but clear. I need time, she said. Time to think. Time to figure out who I am outside of being your assistant. Time to decide if I can live with what you are. I'll give you all the time you need. And you'll tell me the truth? About everything? No more secrets? No more secrets, Adrian promised. Then I'll stay. She swallowed hard. At least for now. At least until I can think straight enough to make a real decision. It wasn't what he wanted. Complete acceptance. Instant forgiveness. The fairy tale ending where love conquered all. But it was honest. It was real. And it was more than he deserved. Okay, he said simply. Dr. Reeves returned a few minutes later, checking Evelyn's vitals with professional efficiency. Temperature is almost normal, heart rate stable. You're going to be fine, Ms. Carter, though you'll need to stay off your feet for a few days. The frostbite damage needs monitoring. How bad is it? Evelyn asked quietly. Moderate. You'll likely lose some tissue on a few fingers and toes, but I don't think we're looking at amputation. You'll have scarring, possible long-term sensitivity to cold. Dr. Reeves' expression softened slightly. You're very lucky. Another hour out there and we'd be having a very different conversation. Lucky. The word felt like a joke. Lucky would have been never being in that situation in the first place. Lucky would have been working for a man who valued her enough to make sure she got home safely. But looking at Adrian's face, raw with emotion he couldn't hide anymore, desperate in a way she'd never seen him, Evelyn wondered if maybe luck was more complicated than simple definitions allowed. I'm going to sleep now, she said, exhaustion pulling at her like a tide. Wake me if there are complications. I'll be right here, Adrian said. And he was. Through the morning hours as dawn finally broke and the storm began to ease, through the pain medication cycles and temperature checks, through the moments when Evelyn cried in her sleep and the moments when she woke, confused and afraid. He stayed. Because for the first time in his life, Adrian Voss had found something more important than his empire. He'd found someone worth protecting, worth changing for, worth risking everything to keep. And as the first light of the new year streamed through the windows, illuminating the woman who'd nearly died because of his negligence and was giving him a chance he absolutely didn't deserve, Adrian made a decision. His empire had been built on fear and violence and the bodies of people who'd gotten in his way, but it could be built into something else, something legitimate, something worthy of the woman lying in that bed. It would take time, years probably. There would be resistance and violence and consequences he couldn't anticipate. But for Evelyn Carter, for the chance to be someone she could actually love rather than fear, Adrian Voss would tear down everything he'd built and start over. He just had to convince her to stay long enough to see it. The morning sun through the windows felt like an accusation. Evelyn lay still, staring at the ornate ceiling of a room that probably cost more than her annual salary, and tried to reconcile the man she'd worked for with the man who'd confessed to murder while holding her hand. Adrian had finally left an hour ago at Dr. Reeves's insistence, his reluctance so palpable it had made the air thick. Now Evelyn was alone with her thoughts, and they were far worse company than a criminal who'd saved her life. Her fingers throbbed beneath the bandages. Her toes felt like they belonged to someone else. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the chaos rioting through her mind. 3 years. 3 years of devotion to a man who ran a criminal empire. 3 years of staying late, of perfectionism, of making herself invisible for someone who claimed he'd always seen her. The door opened quietly. Not Adrian. She could feel the difference in the air, the absence of that coiled intensity he carried like a second skin. A young woman entered carrying a breakfast tray, her movements efficient but not unkind. Mr. Voss thought you might be hungry, she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. I'm Maria. I oversee the household staff. If you need anything, there's a call button right here. Evelyn looked at the food, Fresh fruit, perfectly cooked eggs, toast that probably came from bread baked that morning. The kind of breakfast she'd grab from a bodega and eat standing up at her desk while answering emails. Does everyone who works here know? The question came out before she could stop it. What he really does? Maria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or pity. We know what we need to know, and we're paid well to forget what we shouldn't remember. That's not an answer. No, Maria agreed. But it's the only one I can give you. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I've worked for Mr. Voss for 8 years. I've seen him angry. I've seen him ruthless. I've seen him do things that would give you nightmares. She met Evelyn's eyes directly. I've never seen him afraid until last night. Never seen him fall apart the way he did when Dr. Reeves was working on you. Whatever he is, whatever he's done, what he feels for you is real. She left before Evelyn could respond, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like finality. Evelyn picked at the food, her appetite non-existent but her body needing fuel. Each bite felt like swallowing stones. Each swallow reminded her that she was alive because a criminal had run into a blizzard to find her. The thought should have been terrifying, should have sent her running the moment she could walk. Instead, it tangled with memories of the raw emotion in Adrian's voice, the desperate grip of his hand, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. She'd spent 3 years hungry for exactly that look, for someone to see her, to value her, to make her feel like she mattered. And now that she had it, it came wrapped in blood and secrets, and a confession that should have destroyed any possibility of something real between them. The door opened again. This time it was Adrian, and the air pressure in the room changed instantly. He'd showered and changed. Dark slacks, a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than her rent. But the exhaustion was carved into his face, the shadows under his eyes speaking of a night spent watching over her instead of sleeping. You should eat more than that, he said, nodding at the barely touched tray. Not hungry. Your body needs... I know what my body needs. The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Evelyn took a breath, forced herself to modulate. Sorry, I'm just processing. Adrian moved to the chair he'd occupied most of the night, sitting with that controlled grace that suggested violence held carefully in check. Take all the time you need. You keep saying that, time, like it's simple. Evelyn shifted against the pillows, wincing as her damaged extremities protested. How much time before your enemies figure out I matter? How much time before someone uses me against you? I've already taken precautions. Security on your apartment, background checks on anyone in your life. Chen is personally overseeing your protection detail. I don't want a protection detail. I want my normal life back. Your normal life nearly killed you last night. The words hit like a slap. Evelyn's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. My normal life was fine until you made me think I had to be perfect, until you created an environment where I felt worthless unless I was sacrificing everything. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. You're right. I know I'm right. I just didn't expect you to admit it. I told you, no more lies. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. You want the truth? I saw your dedication and used it. Saw how hard you worked and pushed you harder. Saw you making yourself invisible and let you keep doing it because it was easier than admitting I wanted you. His voice dropped. I'm not a good man, Evelyn. I've never pretended to be. But what I did to you was worse than the crimes I commit for profit. Those I can justify. What I did to you, there's no justification. Evelyn stared at him, this man who commanded an empire through fear, who just stripped himself bare with an honesty that felt more dangerous than any weapon. Why tell me all of this? She asked quietly. Why not just let me think you're a ruthless businessman? Why confess to murder and crime and everything that could send you to prison? Because you deserve to choose with full knowledge. Not the fiction I've been selling, but the reality. Adrian's eyes held hers. And because if we're going to have any chance at something real, it has to be built on truth, even ugly truth. You think we have a chance? After everything you've told me? I think you're still here, still asking questions instead of demanding I take you home. He paused. That's more than I deserve. Evelyn looked down at her bandaged hands, at the visible evidence of how close she'd come to death. I don't know what I want. Don't know if I can live with what you are. Don't even know if what I feel is real or just trauma bonding or some psychological mess I'll need years of therapy to untangle. That's fair. But I'm not running. Not yet. She met his eyes. I want to understand. Want to see your world without the filters. Want to know what loving you would actually mean. Something fierce and possessive flared in Adrian's expression before he locked it down. Loving me would mean danger, would mean living with secrets, would mean accepting that I've done terrible things and will probably do more before this is over. What is this? What are you trying to do? Adrian stood, moving to the window, his back to her as he spoke. For 20 years, I've built an empire on fear and violence. It's efficient, profitable, and it's made me into someone who doesn't flinch at things that should keep me awake at night. He turned to face her. But last night, carrying you through that storm, I realized that empire means nothing if I lose the one person who makes me feel human. So what? You're going to give it all up? Become a saint? Evelyn couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. No, I'm going to transform it. Slowly, carefully. The legitimate businesses are already profitable. They don't need the criminal operations propping them up. I can phase out the illegal activities, clean up the money, rebuild everything on a foundation that won't put you in danger or force you to live in moral compromise. That's not possible. You can't just walk away from organized crime. Your enemies won't let you. Your own people won't let you. I know. Adrian's voice was flat, accepting. It's going to be ugly. People will resist. Some will try to take over. Some will try to kill me for showing weakness. He moved back to the bed, sitting on the edge carefully. But I'm willing to risk it. For you. For the chance at something that isn't built on blood. Evelyn's breath caught. You're serious? Completely. Why? Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know? I know you. The certainty in his voice was absolute. I know you take your coffee with too much cream and not enough sugar. I know you apologize to furniture when you bump into it. I know you have a scar on your left wrist from a childhood accident and you fidget with it when you're nervous. I know you're loyal to a fault and brilliant in ways you don't recognize and so goddamn determined to prove your worth, it breaks my heart. His hand covered hers gently, mindful of the bandages. I've spent 3 years learning you. The only thing I don't know is whether you can forgive me enough to let me love you the way you deserve. His tears spilled over before Evelyn could stop them. This is insane. You're a criminal. I'm nobody. This doesn't work in real life. Nothing about my life is normal. Why should this be? She laughed, the sound wet and broken. You're impossible. Yes. Adrian's thumb brushed across her knuckles. But I'm also yours, if you'll have me. The offer hung between them, weighted with everything unspoken. Evelyn looked at this man who'd confessed to murder, who'd saved her life, who was offering to dismantle an empire for the chance at something real. She should say no, should run, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak of loving someone whose world operated by rules she'd never understand. But she'd spent 3 years invisible, 3 years safe, 3 years protecting herself from risk, and ending up with nothing but loneliness and frostbite to show for it. I need to see it, she said finally. Your world. Not the sanitized version, the real thing. I need to understand what I'd be accepting before I can make any decisions. Adrian's expression shifted. Surprise, then something darker. You want to see the empire? Yes. Evelyn, some things can't be unseen. Once you know the details, once you understand the scope of what I do, there's no going back to comfortable ignorance. Good. I don't want ignorance. I want truth. She squeezed his hand as much as her damaged fingers allowed. You said no more lies. Prove it. Show me everything. For a long moment, Adrian studied her face, searching for something. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, but not today. Today you rest. Let your body heal. And I'll prepare you for what you're about to learn. Prepare me how? By telling you a story. Adrian settled back in the chair, his eyes distant. About a boy who grew up with nothing, whose father drank away every paycheck and whose mother disappeared when he was 12, who learned early that the world was divided into predators and prey, and the only way to survive was to become something neither. Evelyn listened as Adrian began to speak, his voice steady but stripped of its usual authority. He talked about a childhood marked by violence, about learning to fight in the streets of Brooklyn, about the first time he'd stolen food and the first time he'd hurt someone who'd hurt him first. "I was 16 when Victor Marino found me," Adrian said. "I just put 3 grown men in the hospital for trying to rob the convenience store where I worked under the table. Victor saw potential in that violence, took me in, taught me how to channel rage into power, how to build loyalty through fear, how to turn brutality into profit. You worked for him for 8 years. I learned the business from the ground up, collection, enforcement, eventually strategy. Victor was old school, territorial, short-sighted, too willing to let personal grudges interfere with profit." Adrian's expression hardened. "When he ordered a hit on a rival's daughter to make a point, I realized I didn't want to work for someone whose cruelty served no purpose but ego." "What did you do?" "I took over, quietly, methodically, built alliances with his lieutenants who were tired of his volatility, presented them with a choice: follow me and prosper, or stay loyal to a dying regime." He paused. "Victor died in his sleep. Heart attack. Very convenient timing." Evelyn's stomach churned. "Did you?" "Yes. One word. No justification, no excuse, just the flat acknowledgement of murder delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. He would have killed me if I'd challenged him openly," Adrian continued. "Would have killed everyone who sided with me. So I made it quick, painless. More mercy than he'd shown countless others." His eyes refocused on her. "That was the first time I killed someone directly. The first time I crossed that line. And once you cross it, there's no going back." "The other 3? Evelyn asked, not sure if she wanted to know but unable to stop herself. "A lieutenant who tried to betray me to the feds, a rival who kidnapped one of my people and sent her back in pieces, and a man who sold children." Adrian's voice went cold on the last one. "That one I didn't make painless." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the estate waking fully, staff moving through halls, the house settling into its daily rhythms. Normal sounds in a world that felt anything but normal. "You're not shocked," Adrian observed. "I'm terrified," Evelyn corrected, "but not shocked. You told me what you were. I'm just processing what that actually means. It means I've built an empire on other people's suffering. It means I make decisions that end lives and rationalize it as business. It means I'm exactly the kind of man your mother would lock the doors against. My mother married a man who criticized her cooking for 30 years and never once told her she was beautiful," Evelyn said quietly. "Her judgment isn't exactly the gold standard." Adrian's lips twitched despite the gravity of the conversation. "Fair point. Tell me about the rest. The empire you're planning to dismantle." So he did. Over the next hour, Adrian laid out the structure of his operations with the clinical precision of a business presentation. The legitimate companies that laundered money. The smuggling routes that brought in everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals. The protection rackets. The loan sharking. The network of paid officials who looked the other way. He didn't dress it up, didn't minimize. Simply presented the facts of an empire built on systematic exploitation and violence. "The legitimate businesses are actually legitimate," he said. "The real estate holdings, the investment firm, the tech companies, they turn real profit without criminal activity. But they were seeded with dirty money, and they provide cover for the operations that aren't legal. And you think you can just shut down the illegal parts? Not quickly, not cleanly, but yes." Adrian leaned forward. "The trick is doing it without creating a power vacuum that gets filled by someone worse. I need to phase out operations while ensuring the people who depend on them have alternatives. Need to satisfy debts and obligations without admitting weakness. Need to convince very dangerous people that evolution serves their interests better than resistance." "That sounds impossible." "It's difficult. Not impossible. I've already started laying groundwork, shifting investments, changing management structures, building legitimate alternatives." He met her eyes. "I didn't decide this last night, Evelyn. I've been thinking about it for months. You nearly dying just clarified my priorities." Evelyn absorbed this, trying to reconcile the criminal with the strategist, the murderer with the man who was willing to rebuild his entire life. "Why tell me all of this? Why not just show me the cleaned-up version later?" "Because you asked for truth. And because if we're going to do this, if you're going to stay, if we're going to try to build something real, you need to understand what you're walking into. Adrian's hand found hers again. I'm offering you a choice, Evelyn. Stay and be part of this transformation, knowing it might take years and will definitely be dangerous. Or walk away now before you're in too deep and I'll make sure you're protected and provided for. You keep giving me outs, she said. Why? Because I don't want you trapped. Don't want you staying out of fear or obligation or some misguided sense that you owe me for saving your life. His voice roughened. I want you to choose me knowing exactly what that choice means. Want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel you have to. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, his large and unmarked, hers small and bandaged, both holding on despite every rational reason to let go. I don't trust you, she said finally. Not completely. Not yet. That's fair. And I don't know if I can love someone who's done what you've done. Don't know if I can live with the knowledge of where your money came from or what you've ordered other people to do. Also fair. But I want to try. The words came out soft but certain. I want to see if this impossible thing between us can actually work. Want to see if you can really become someone different. Want to understand my own feelings without the filter of 3 years of thinking I was invisible. Adrian's eyes closed briefly, something like relief washing over his features. Okay, but I have conditions. His eyes opened. Name them. No more secrets. If something happens in your world that affects me, I get to know. No protecting me with ignorance. Done. I'm not your employee anymore. I'm your equal. That means I get a voice in decisions that affect us both. Done. And if at any point I decide I can't handle this, if I want out, you let me go. No guilt trips, no manipulation, no making it difficult. Adrian hesitated on this one, and Evelyn saw the cost of agreeing written across his face. But finally, he nodded. Done. Say it, she pressed. Promise me. I promise that if you want to leave, I'll let you go. The words sounded like they were being dragged from somewhere deep and painful. I won't like it, won't want it, but I'll respect your choice. Evelyn searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was another manipulation. She found only raw honesty and the kind of vulnerability that men like Adrian Voss probably showed once in a lifetime. Okay, she said, then show me. Show me your world. All of it. Not today, Adrian said firmly. Today you rest. Doctor's orders and mine. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow. He stood, then leaned down to press a kiss to her forehead, chaste, gentle, nothing like the intensity she'd expected. Rest, Evelyn. Build your strength. You're going to need it. He left her then, and Evelyn lay back against the pillows, her mind spinning with everything she'd learned. She'd agreed to something insane, had committed to exploring a relationship with a man who'd admitted to murder, who ran a criminal empire, who was promising to change in ways that would take years if they were even possible. It was reckless, dangerous, completely contrary to every safe, careful choice she'd made in her life. But lying there in a room that cost a fortune, her body damaged from nearly freezing to death while trying to prove her worth to a man who'd always seen her, Evelyn realized that safe choices had gotten her nowhere, had left her invisible and alone and desperate for something that felt real. Adrian Voss was a lot of terrible things, but he was real. His feelings were real. His promise to change was real. And for the first time in 3 years, Evelyn felt like she might be real too. Not a shadow or a ghost or background noise, but an actual person with agency and choice and the power to demand better. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, dreams filled with snow and steel-gray eyes and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of being truly seen. 3 days later, Evelyn stood in front of the mirror in the guest room, examining the woman staring back at her. The frostbite damage on her fingers and toes had begun the slow process of healing, though Dr. Reeves had warned the scars would be permanent. Small prices, she'd said, for surviving what should have killed her. But the physical scars weren't what kept Evelyn awake at night. It was the invisible ones, the realization that she'd been so desperate for validation that she'd almost died for it, that she'd made herself so small she'd disappeared even from her own life. You ready? Adrian's voice came from the doorway. He'd been careful these past days, giving her space while remaining close enough that she never felt abandoned. It was a delicate balance, and somehow he'd managed it without making her feel smothered or neglected. Evelyn turned to face him. He wore his usual expensive armor, tailored suit, crisp shirt, the kind of clothes that announced power before he even spoke. But there was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, a wariness in his eyes that told her today mattered. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said. Today was the day Adrian would show her his empire, the real one. Not the sanitized business presentations and quarterly reports she'd worked on for 3 years, but the machinery beneath, the blood and leverage and fear that made it all run. The drive into the city was quiet, the snow-covered landscape passing in a blur outside the Range Rover's windows. Marcus Chen was driving, his presence a reminder that even this simple trip required security Adrian hadn't needed before. Or maybe he had needed it, and she'd just been too blind to notice. "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked as they entered Manhattan. "Warehouse District, one of my legitimate operations that isn't entirely legitimate." Adrian's tone was matter-of-fact. "Import-export business. On paper, we move electronics and textiles. In reality, about 40% of what comes through those doors shouldn't be there." "Smuggling." "Yes." Chen glanced at them in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. Evelyn wondered what he thought of this, his boss exposing operational details to someone who'd been just an assistant days ago. If he had opinions, his face didn't show them. The warehouse was a sprawling concrete structure that looked exactly like 100 others lining the waterfront. Nothing distinguished it except the security cameras positioned at strategic intervals and the men who watched their approach with the kind of awareness that suggested military training. "Stay close to me," Adrian said as they got out. "Everyone here knows who I am. As of this morning, they also know who you are and that you're off limits. But old habits die hard, and some of these men aren't good with change." It wasn't exactly comforting, but Evelyn appreciated the honesty. She followed Adrian through the main entrance, Chen a silent shadow at their backs. The inside was organized chaos, shipping containers being unloaded, workers moving with efficient purpose, the smell of diesel and cardboard thick in the air. Everything looked normal until you noticed the separate area cordoned off with chain-link fencing, the additional security, the way certain containers were marked with symbols that meant nothing to casual observers. A man approached, late 40s, with the kind of build that suggested he'd been dangerous once and hadn't forgotten how. "Mr. Voss, didn't expect you today." "Dmitri." Adrian's tone was cordial but carried unmistakable authority. "This is Evelyn Carter. She's with me." Dmitri's eyes flicked to Evelyn, assessment happening in microseconds. "Ma'am?" Then back to Adrian. "We have a situation. Third container from the Jakarta shipment. Customs flagged it for secondary inspection." "How bad?" "Could be routine. Could be someone got paid to look closer. Chen's contact at the port is trying to determine which." Adrian nodded slowly. "Pull everything from that shipment. Route it through the Providence facility until we know what we're dealing with." "That'll cost us 3 days and the penalty fees. Better than losing the entire operation because we got sloppy." Adrian's voice hardened. "And find out who packed that container. If someone's cutting corners to save time, they need to understand why procedures exist." The underlying threat in those words made Evelyn's stomach tighten. This was Adrian in his element, commanding, cold, making decisions that probably involved people getting hurt for mistakes. Dmitri nodded and disappeared into the warehouse. Adrian turned to Evelyn, reading her expression with uncomfortable accuracy. "You want to ask something? What happens to whoever packed that container?" "Depends on whether it was incompetence or sabotage. Incompetence means retraining and docked pay. Sabotage means they disappear from my organization." He paused. "Just from the organization. I don't kill people for business mistakes." "Just for betrayal?" "Yes." The casual admission should have sent her running. Instead, Evelyn found herself asking, "Can I see it? The shipment that's being moved?" Adrian studied her for a long moment, then gestured for her to follow. They walked deeper into the warehouse, past workers who stepped aside with a deference that bordered on fear until they reached the cordoned area. Inside were containers marked with those strange symbols, each one representing something illegal crossing international borders. Adrian spoke briefly to the supervisor, then opened one of the containers. Electronics. Expensive ones, still in their packaging, brands Evelyn recognized from high-end stores. Nothing obviously illegal about them until Adrian pointed to the serial numbers. Stolen, he said. Taken from a warehouse in Singapore, serial numbers filed off and replaced, shipped here and sold at 60% of retail value. The buyers know they're hot, but they don't care because the profit margins are too good. You're stealing from corporations? I'm facilitating the redistribution of goods that were insured anyway. The corporations get their insurance payout. My buyers get discounted products. Everyone wins except the insurance companies, and they're not exactly sympathetic victims. It was rationalization, and they both knew it. But Evelyn had to admit it wasn't the violent criminality she'd braced herself for. What else comes through here? Pharmaceuticals, not drugs. Actual medications that cost a fortune in the States but are pennies to manufacture overseas. We bring them in, sell them to clinics that serve uninsured populations. Adrian's tone was neutral. Illegal as hell, but I sleep fine knowing diabetics can afford insulin. Evelyn's mind reeled. You're a criminal, Robin Hood? I'm a criminal who's not an idiot. Moving stolen electronics and gray market medication carries risk, but it's manageable. It builds goodwill in communities that might otherwise cause problems, and it's profitable without being unconscionable. He closed the container. The uglier operations, the ones I'm shutting down, don't happen here. Where do they happen? Different locations, different personnel. Compartmentalized, so if one operation falls, it doesn't bring down everything else. Adrian started walking back toward the entrance. I'll show you one, but not today. Today you've seen enough. Evelyn wanted to argue, to insist on seeing everything at once, ripping the bandage off completely. But the tension in Adrian's shoulders, the careful way he was managing this exposure, told her he was giving her what he thought she could handle. Back in the car, Chen drove them to a restaurant in Midtown, the kind of place where power brokers made deals over expensive meals and the staff knew never to interrupt important conversations. Adrian led her to a private room in the back, where a man waited. Late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit that somehow looked wrong on him, like he was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Evelyn, this is James Horvath. He's a city planning commissioner. Adrian's tone was pleasant, but Evelyn heard the edge beneath. James, Evelyn Carter. She's learning about my business interests. Horvath's eyes widened slightly. All of them? All of them. The commissioner shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting an audience. Mr. Voss, if this is a bad time, it's fine. Evelyn understands confidentiality. Adrian sat, gesturing for Evelyn to do the same. You have the variance approvals? Horvath pulled papers from his briefcase with shaking hands. Everything you requested. The waterfront development is approved for commercial and residential. The environmental concerns were addressed. Addressed how? The reports were amended. The contamination levels are still above safe limits, but the documentation now shows they're within acceptable parameters. Horvath wouldn't meet Adrian's eyes. It wasn't easy. The original inspector had to be convinced to revise his findings. Convinced, Adrian repeated. That's a polite word. How much did it cost? $50,000, plus a guarantee that his daughter's college applications would receive favorable consideration at certain private institutions. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. This was it. The corruption, the buying of officials, the manipulation of public safety for profit. This was what funded the empire Adrian was promising to dismantle. And the zoning for the Brooklyn project? Adrian continued. Approved. The residential restrictions were waived. You can build commercial on that site despite the neighborhood complaints. Horvath finally looked up. Mr. Voss, the community is organizing. There's talk of lawsuits, media attention. This could get messy. Then handle it. That's what you're paid for. Adrian's voice went cold. Or should I find someone who can? The threat was implicit but clear. Horvath paled. No, I'll handle it. The community leaders can be reasoned with or persuaded. Good. Chen will deliver your payment. Adrian stood, effectively ending the meeting. And James? Don't amend any more environmental reports. If a site is contaminated, I want to know. I don't profit from poisoning neighborhoods. The contradiction made Evelyn's head spin. Adrian was bribing officials and crushing community opposition, but drew the line at actual environmental damage? After Horvath left, practically fleeing the room, Evelyn finally spoke. You threatened a city official into approving projects he knows are wrong for those communities. Yes, but you won't falsify environmental reports. No. That doesn't make sense. You're still doing terrible things, still corrupting the system. Adrian poured wine from the bottle that had been waiting on the table. I never claimed to be consistent. I told you what I am. A criminal with boundaries, but still a criminal. Why show me this? Why not just show me the Robin Hood parts and hide the rest? Because you asked for truth. This is truth. He met her eyes across the table. I bribe officials. I manipulate systems. I use fear and leverage to get what I want. And yes, sometimes communities suffer because I prioritize profit over their concerns. He paused. I'm not asking you to approve. I'm showing you what you'd be accepting if you stay. Evelyn picked up her wine glass, buying time to think. Everything she'd seen today contradicted itself. Stolen goods sold for profit, but medications provided to the uninsured. Officials corrupted, but environmental protections maintained. A man who admitted to murder but drew arbitrary lines he refused to cross. Tell me about the operations you're shutting down, she said. The ones worse than this. Adrian's expression darkened. Protection rackets mostly. Small businesses paying for safety from threats I created. It's effective and profitable, but it's also grinding people down. Taking money from shop owners who can barely afford it, making them afraid in their own neighborhoods. His jaw tightened. That's the part I can't justify. Can't rationalize as redistribution or gray market services. It's just exploitation. And you're stopping it? I've already started. Territories are being transferred to legitimate security services, still my companies, but operating legally. The shop owners pay for actual protection now, with contracts and accountability. It costs me short-term revenue, but it's sustainable long-term. Your people can't be happy about that. They're not. I've had 2 lieutenants quit, and 1 try to take his territory independent. Chen handled it. Adrian's tone suggested that handled meant something terminal. Change creates resistance, especially when that change threatens profit. Someone tried to break away and you killed them. Chen killed them after they murdered one of my people who'd been transitioning their accounts to legitimate businesses. Adrian's voice was flat. I told you this wouldn't be clean. Evelyn set down her wine, her appetite gone. How many more? How many more people die while you're transforming your empire? I don't know. The honesty was brutal. I'm trying to minimize casualties, trying to make the transition smooth enough that most people see evolution rather than weakness. But some won't accept it. Some will see opportunity in the chaos. And some will have to be removed for the safety of everyone else. And you're okay with that. I'm not okay with anything. I just recognize necessity. Adrian leaned back, studying her. You want me to be someone I'm not. Want me to have sudden morality that makes this all easier to accept. But I can't give you that. I can only give you the truth that I'm trying to be better than I was. Trying to build something that doesn't require constant violence to maintain. Trying to become someone worthy of you. The last sentence hit her harder than all the confessions of bribery and corruption combined. Why does it matter? Evelyn asked quietly. Why do I matter enough to change everything? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard from him before. Because, for 20 years, I've built a life where nothing touches me, where I feel nothing except the satisfaction of winning and the calculation of my next move. I convinced myself that being untouchable was the same as being strong. He met her eyes. And then you walked into my office, and suddenly, being untouchable felt like being dead. Like I'd carved out everything human and replaced it with something that could survive but couldn't live. That's a lot of pressure to put on one person. I know, and if it's too much, if you can't carry it, I'll understand. But you asked why you matter, and that's the answer. You make me want to be someone who deserves to feel again, someone who can look at himself without flinching. Evelyn's eyes burned. I don't know if I can do this. Don't know if I can love someone who's done what you've done, who's still doing things that hurt people even while trying to change. I know. But I can't walk away either. Can't pretend I don't feel something. Can't go back to being invisible after you've made me feel seen. Adrian reached across the table, his hand covering hers carefully. Then don't walk away. Don't commit to forever. Just stay for today. See how you feel tomorrow. Build this one day at a time until you know what you want. It was the most reasonable thing he could have said, the kindest option. Take away the pressure of a permanent decision. Allow her to choose moment by moment, day by day. Okay, Evelyn said. Today I stay. Tomorrow we'll see. They finished lunch in relative silence, the weight of everything unspoken pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Outside, the city continued its chaotic dance. Millions of people living normal lives, untouched by the criminal empire operating in their midst. The next stop was an office building in the financial district. Legitimate on its face, investment firm, wealth management, all the respectable trappings of old money and careful planning. But Adrian led her past the public floors to a private elevator that required a key card and a retinal scan. The top floor was different, still expensive, still professional, but with an edge of something darker. Men in suits who moved like soldiers. Women whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. The atmosphere of a place where the wrong question could have permanent consequences. Money laundering, Adrian said quietly as they walked through. Every dollar that comes from illegal operations flows through here, gets cleaned, invested in legitimate businesses, emerges as taxable income. It's the heart of the whole operation. Without this, everything else collapses. And you're shutting this down too? Transforming it. The illegal money flow is already decreasing as I phase out operations. Eventually, this will be a normal investment firm managing normal wealth. But the transition takes time because the money's already in the system. Can't just stop without triggering investigations. They entered a conference room where a woman waited. 30s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She stood when they entered, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Voss, I wasn't expecting you today. I know, Evelyn, this is Karen Zhao. She manages the financial operations. Adrian gestured for them both to sit. Karen, I need you to walk Evelyn through how we've been restructuring the asset portfolio. No jargon, no sanitization, just facts. Karen's eyes flicked to Evelyn, assessment and curiosity warring in her expression. Everything? Everything. What followed was 90 minutes of the most complicated criminal finance Evelyn had ever encountered. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, investment structures designed to obscure ownership and origin. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure, a maze so complex that even with Karen explaining it, Evelyn could barely follow the threads. Currently, about 60% of assets under management are from legitimate sources, Karen concluded. The remaining 40% is dirty money in various stages of cleaning. At our current rate of transition, we'll be completely legitimate in approximately 4 years. 4 years, Evelyn repeated. 4 years of operating this system. 4 years of money laundering. 4 years of unwinding a system that took 20 years to build, Adrian corrected. We can't just flip a switch. Every account we close triggers scrutiny. Every asset we divest creates questions. This has to be gradual, or it brings federal attention neither of us wants. Federal attention you deserve. Yes. No argument, no justification, just acknowledgement. Karen looked between them, clearly confused by the dynamic. Adrian dismissed her with thanks, and they were alone in the conference room. Evelyn moved to the windows, looking out over Manhattan. Somewhere down there were millions of people living honest lives, working legitimate jobs, building futures on foundations that wouldn't crumble if the wrong prosecutors started asking questions. I can't do this, she said quietly. Adrian went very still behind her. Okay. Not the leaving part. I mean, I can't watch you operate the system for 4 more years. Can't know that money's being laundered and officials are being bribed and people are being threatened and just accept it as the price of transformation. What do you want me to do? His voice was carefully controlled. I want you to find a way to do it faster. Want you to prioritize differently. Want you to show me that changing for me actually means changing, not just moving the timeline from never to eventually. She turned to face him. You said you'd do anything. Prove it. Accelerate this transition. Accept the scrutiny if it comes. Take the risk of federal attention. Show me that I matter more than protecting your empire. Adrian stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You understand what you're asking? If we speed this up, people will notice. Competitors will see opportunity. Law enforcement will ask questions. It could destroy everything. Then maybe everything needs to be destroyed. Evelyn's voice steadied. Maybe you can't transform something this corrupt. Maybe you need to burn it down and build something completely new. And if that burning takes me down with it, if I end up in prison or dead because I moved too fast, then at least you'd go down as someone who tried, someone who chose being better over being safe. She stepped closer. I'm not asking you to be stupid. I'm asking you to prove that this transformation is real, that I'm not just a reason to justify a slightly slower path to the same destination. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. His expression cycled through emotions too quick to name: fear, anger, something that might have been hope. Then he pulled out his phone and called Chen. Accelerate the timeline, he said without preamble. The full transition. I want every illegal operation shut down or legitimized within 18 months. Chen's response was audible even without speakerphone. Sharp, disbelieving, warning. I know the risks, Adrian continued. I know what it could cost. Do it anyway. Start with the protection rackets. Phase them out completely by the end of the quarter. The smuggling operations next. Move everything to legitimate import channels or shut them down. I want a new plan on my desk by Monday. More protests from Chen, more logical arguments against moving this fast. Marcus. Adrian's voice cut through the objections. I'm not asking. This is happening. Either you're with me or you're not. Decide now. A pause. Then Chen's voice, quieter. I'm with you. Always have been. But boss, this is going to get ugly. I know. That's why I need you. Adrian ended the call and looked at Evelyn. 18 months. Everything legitimate or gone. It won't be clean and it won't be safe. But it'll be done. Evelyn's breath caught. She'd expected argument. Expected him to find reasons why her demand was unreasonable. Expected anything except immediate compliance that put his entire empire at risk. Why? She asked. Why agree so fast? Adrian closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd learned about him today. Because you're right, he said quietly. Because 4 years of slow change is just 4 years of continued crime dressed up in prettier clothes. Because if I'm going to transform, it needs to be real transformation, not comfortable evolution. His thumb brushed her cheek. And because you matter more than the empire, more than my safety, more than anything. Evelyn felt tears spill over, her careful control finally breaking. This is insane. You're risking everything. Yes. People are going to try to kill you. Probably. The feds might come after you anyway. Possibly. And you're okay with all of that? Adrian's smile was sad and honest and more vulnerable than anything she'd seen from him. I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of losing you, of looking back in 20 years and realizing I had a chance at something real and chose safety instead. Evelyn kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated, just a sudden overwhelming need to close the distance between them, to feel something real after a day of wading through corruption and violence and moral compromise. Adrian responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close with a desperation that matched her own. The kiss was nothing like the gentle forehead press he'd given her before. This was raw and hungry and edged with the knowledge that they were choosing each other despite every rational reason not to. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn rested her forehead against his chest and laughed, the sound brittle and overwhelmed. We're going to destroy each other, she said. Probably, Adrian agreed, or save each other. Hard to tell which. Is there a difference? With us? I don't think so. They stood there in the conference room of a building dedicated to financial crime, holding each other while the city spread out beneath them, and Evelyn realized she'd made her choice. Not forever, not with certainty, but for today, for tomorrow, for however long this impossible thing lasted. She was staying. She was seeing Adrian Voss, all of him, the criminal and the man trying to be better. She was accepting the danger and the moral complexity and the terrifying possibility that love didn't have to be simple to be real. Take me home, she said quietly. I've seen enough for today. Adrian nodded, his arms tightening briefly before releasing her. The estate or your apartment? Evelyn considered. Her apartment was safety, familiar ground, the life she'd built before everything changed. The estate was Adrian's world, beautiful and dangerous and completely foreign. The estate, she decided. If I'm doing this, I'm all in. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Adrian's eyes before he schooled his expression. Okay. They left the building, Chen waiting with the car. The drive back was quiet, both of them processing the seismic shifts of the day. Evelyn watched Manhattan give way to suburbs. Suburbs give way to wooded estates. Reality giving way to this strange new world she'd chosen. When they finally pulled up to the house, Adrian helped her out, his hand finding hers and holding on. They walked inside together, no longer boss and assistant, no longer criminal and victim, but something new and undefined and fragile as glass. Whatever came next, federal investigations or criminal retaliation or the slow, painful work of transformation, they would face it together. It was terrifying. It was possibly doomed. It was the most real thing Evelyn had ever felt. And for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't invisible. She was seen, chosen, valued in ways that had nothing to do with her productivity or perfectionism or ability to make herself small. She was Evelyn Carter, loved by a criminal who was willing to destroy his empire for her. And somehow, against all logic, that was exactly where she wanted to be. 6 months passed like a storm, violent, transformative, impossible to predict. Evelyn watched from the center of it as Adrian systematically dismantled an empire he'd spent 20 years building, and every day brought new proof that choosing love over safety had consequences neither of them could have anticipated. The first casualty came 3 weeks after Adrian accelerated the timeline. A lieutenant named Rodriguez, who'd run the protection operations in Brooklyn, decided the transition to legitimate security was an insult to everything they'd built. He tried to take his territory independent, recruiting other dissatisfied operators with promises of maintaining the old ways. Chen handled it with the brutal efficiency Adrian had warned about. Rodriguez disappeared, his recruits scattered. The message was clear: evolution or elimination, but there was no third option. Evelyn had been in Adrian's office when Chen delivered the report, his voice flat and professional as he described how the problem had been permanently resolved. She'd felt her stomach turn, felt the weight of complicity settle on her shoulders like concrete. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Adrian had said after Chen left. "I asked for truth. This is truth." But her hands had shaken as she'd said it, and Adrian had seen. He'd pulled her close, holding her while she processed the reality that her demand for faster change had directly resulted in someone's death, that her insistence on transformation had put people in danger she'd never even met. "This is on me," Adrian had said quietly. "Not you. The choice was always mine." But Evelyn knew better. She'd pushed. She'd demanded. She bore responsibility for the acceleration that made violence inevitable. It was the first test of whether she could actually live in Adrian's world, whether intellectual understanding of what he was could survive the visceral reality of what that meant. She'd stayed. But something had changed, a hardness developing around her heart, a recognition that loving Adrian Voss meant accepting blood on both their hands. The federal attention came in month 4. An FBI agent named Sarah Martinez showed up at the office building, asking questions about financial irregularities, shell corporations, and the convenient deaths of several known criminals over the past months. Adrian had been expecting it, had prepared for it with the same strategic precision he brought to everything. The legitimate businesses were genuinely legitimate, their books clean enough to survive scrutiny. The illegal operations that remained were so compartmentalized that even aggressive investigation couldn't connect them directly to Adrian. But it was close. Too close. Martinez was smart and determined, and she'd made it clear she knew exactly what Adrian was, even if she couldn't prove it yet. "She's going to keep digging," Karen Zhao had warned during an emergency meeting. "And if she digs deep enough during this transition period, while we're still unwinding operations, she might find something that sticks." "Then we give her something else to chase," Adrian had said. "Someone smaller, someone whose arrest makes her look successful while protecting the larger operations." "You mean a sacrifice?" Evelyn had spoken up for the first time, her voice cutting through the strategy discussion. "You're going to give up one of your people to protect yourself." The room had gone silent. Karen and Chen had exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with her presence during operational planning. But Adrian had insisted she be included in everything, had meant it when he'd promised no more secrets. "Not someone innocent," Adrian had said carefully. "We have operators who've been skimming, running side operations, violating the boundaries I set. They're liabilities anyway. Martinez gets a win, we eliminate problems, everyone benefits. Except the person you're feeding to the feds. Except them, yes. It was cold calculation dressed up as pragmatism, and Evelyn had felt the gulf between who she'd been 6 months ago and who she was becoming. The old Evelyn would have been horrified, would have seen this as unforgivable moral compromise. The new Evelyn, the one who'd watched Adrian bleed himself trying to transform, who'd sat beside him during sleepless nights as he wrestled with decisions that had no good options, understood necessity in ways that shamed her. "Do it," she'd said quietly, "but make sure they get good legal representation. Make sure their families are taken care of. Don't just throw them away." Adrian had looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been sorrow. Done. 2 weeks later, an operator named Kovacs was arrested on charges of racketeering and money laundering. The evidence was airtight because Chen had made sure it was. Kovacs had been stealing and would have been eliminated anyway under the old system. This way he got prison instead of a grave, and his family got a trust fund that would support them through his sentence. It wasn't mercy. But it wasn't the casual brutality of the empire Adrian was leaving behind either. It was something in between, pragmatic compromise that tried to be better without pretending to be good. Agent Martinez got her win. The investigation cooled, and Evelyn added another weight to the growing collection of moral compromises she carried. But the transformation continued. By month 6, the protection rackets were completely legitimate security operations. The smuggling had shifted to legal import channels, the profit margins smaller but sustainable. The money laundering was in its final stages, the last of the dirty money being cleaned and invested in businesses that would stand up to any scrutiny. It was working. Impossibly, despite the resistance and violence and federal attention, Adrian was actually doing it. Dismantling an empire and rebuilding it into something that wouldn't require constant criminality to maintain. The cost showed in his face, new lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark hair, a weariness that suggested he was fighting battles Evelyn couldn't see. But he never wavered, never suggested slowing down or returning to the old ways, because he'd promised her. And Adrian Voss kept his promises. Their relationship evolved in parallel with the empire's transformation. The first time they'd made love had been 2 months in, after a particularly brutal day when 3 more operators had tried to break away and Chen had made examples that left Evelyn shaking with horror and disgust. Adrian had found her on the estate's terrace, staring at nothing, trying to reconcile the man she loved with the monster whose orders had resulted in violence she could barely comprehend. "You should leave," he'd said quietly, standing beside her. "I'd understand. I'd help you disappear, make sure you're safe, give you everything you need to start over somewhere I can't touch you. Is that what you want? I want you safe. Want you whole. Want you to not carry the weight of my sins." His voice had been raw. "You're breaking, Evelyn. I can see it. And I hate myself for being the cause." She'd turned to him then, this man who'd literally saved her life, and was figuratively destroying it, and made a choice. "I'm not leaving. I'm staying. And I'm choosing you with full knowledge of what that means." She'd taken his hand. "But I need something from you. Need to feel something besides horror and compromise. Need to remember why I'm doing this." "What do you need?" "You. All of you. Not the criminal or the strategist or the man trying to be better. Just you." He'd kissed her then, and it had been nothing like that first desperate kiss in the conference room. This had been slow and deliberate and edged with the kind of need that came from months of restraint. He'd carried her to his bedroom, not the guest room she'd been using, but his private space that smelled like him and held no pretense of distance. They'd made love with the kind of intensity that came from 2 people clinging to each other in a storm. And afterward, lying tangled together, Evelyn had finally cried. Not delicate tears, but ugly, choking sobs for everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained and the impossible price of transformation. Adrian had held her through it, his own control finally cracking as he'd whispered apologies and promises and confessions against her skin. "I love you," he'd said, "and I'm sorry that loving me cost you so much." "I love you too," she'd answered, "and I'm not sorry. I'm terrified and overwhelmed, and I don't know how to be this person I'm becoming, but I'm not sorry." After that night, the lines between them had blurred completely. Evelyn wasn't his assistant anymore. Hadn't been since that New Year's Eve that felt like a lifetime ago. She was his partner, his conscience, the person who pushed him toward better, even when better was expensive and dangerous. She attended meetings with operators being transitioned out, watched as Adrian negotiated legitimate employment for people who'd known nothing but crime, saw him set up training programs and job placement services and support systems for families affected by the transformation. It wasn't redemption, but it was responsibility. And slowly, Evelyn began to understand that Adrian's empire hadn't been built entirely on exploitation. There were people who'd had nothing before he'd given them purpose, structure, income, families who'd been lifted out of poverty, communities that had been protected even if the protection had come with strings. The empire had been corrupt, but it hadn't been purely evil. And the transformation wasn't destroying lives so much as restructuring them into sustainable futures. It was a subtle distinction, but it mattered. It let Evelyn sleep at night, let her look at herself in the mirror without complete shame. The breakthrough came in month 7, during a meeting Evelyn hadn't expected to witness. Chen had arranged a gathering of Adrian's remaining operators, the ones who'd survived the purge, who'd accepted the transformation, who were genuinely trying to build legitimate futures. About 30 people in a warehouse that had once stored smuggled goods and now held equipment for a legitimate logistics company. Adrian stood before them, and Evelyn saw something she'd never seen before: uncertainty. The man who commanded through fear and force, who'd built an empire on intimidation, looked almost vulnerable. "Most of you have worked for me for years," Adrian began. "Some of you for decades. You've made me rich. You've protected my interests. You've done things I asked without question because that's what this life demanded." He paused. "And now I'm asking you to become something different. To walk away from the quick money and the easy violence and build something that's harder but sustainable." A man in the back spoke up, older, scarred, the kind of face that had seen and done terrible things. "Why should we trust this isn't just temporary, that you won't change your mind when it gets too hard?" "Because I'm all in, because I've burned bridges with people who wanted the old ways. Because I've made myself a target for law enforcement and competitors alike by choosing this transformation." Adrian's voice strengthened. "But more than that, because I finally have something worth protecting that isn't this empire. Someone who made me realize that power built on fear is just another kind of prison." He'd looked at Evelyn then, and every person in that warehouse had followed his gaze. "This is Evelyn Carter," Adrian continued. "Most of you know she's important to me. What you might not know is that she's the reason any of this is happening. She's the one who demanded I be better, who refused to accept comfortable lies, who looked at everything I've built and said it wasn't good enough." He turned back to the assembled operators. "And she was right. This empire has served its purpose, made us wealthy and powerful and feared. But it's cost us our humanity, cost us the ability to build anything that lasts beyond our ability to enforce it through violence." The warehouse was silent. Evelyn felt 30 pairs of eyes assessing her, judging her, trying to understand how one woman could have caused this seismic shift. "So here's what I'm offering," Adrian said. "Legitimate employment. Real careers with benefits and retirement and the ability to tell your families what you actually do for a living. It won't be as exciting as what we did before. The money won't come as fast, but you'll be able to sleep without wondering if tonight's the night someone puts a bullet in you for past sins." He paused. "Anyone who doesn't want that can leave now. I'll give you severance, references that'll get you work elsewhere, and we part on good terms. But if you stay, you commit to this transformation completely. No side operations, no old ways. We build something new together, or we don't build at all." No one moved. The scarred man who'd questioned Adrian earlier finally nodded slowly. "I'm in. My kid starts college next year. Would be nice to actually attend her graduation without worrying about who might show up with a grudge." Others murmured agreement. One by one, the operators committed to the transformation, and Evelyn realized she was watching something historic: the voluntary dismantling of a criminal empire by the people who'd built it. After the meeting, Chen pulled Evelyn aside while Adrian spoke with individuals. "You know this is because of you, right?" Chen said quietly. "In 20 years, I've never seen him waver, never seen him second-guess, never seen him choose anything over the empire." He studied her with sharp eyes. "He'd burn it all down for you. Probably will, if that's what it takes to keep you. I don't want him to burn anything down. I just want him to be someone I can love without destroying myself. Too late for that. You're already different from who you were. Chen's expression softened slightly. But different isn't always bad. You've made him better. That's worth something. Has it made you better? Evelyn asked. You've killed people during this transition, enforced Adrian's will with violence. How do you justify that? Chen was quiet for a moment. I don't. I accept that I'm not a good man and I'm not trying to be. But I'm loyal to someone who's trying to be better. And I'll do what's necessary to protect that transformation. He met her eyes. That's the difference between Adrian and me. He's evolving. I'm just making sure he survives long enough to complete it. It was the most honest thing Chen had ever said to her, and somehow it helped. Not everyone would transform. Not everyone could. But as long as Adrian kept trying, kept pushing toward better, even when better was hard, the cost might be worth it. The proposal came in month 9. In the same office where Evelyn had once worked late into the night, trying to prove her worth to a man who'd already seen her. The space had been transformed, no longer just Adrian's domain, but theirs. Her desk positioned beside his, her input valued in every decision, her presence a constant reminder of why the transformation mattered. They were reviewing the final phase of the money laundering shutdown when Adrian suddenly stood, moved around the desk, and dropped to one knee. Evelyn's breath caught. What are you doing? Something I should have done months ago. He pulled a box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring that was beautiful in its simplicity. A single diamond, elegant and understated, nothing like the ostentatious wealth he could have chosen. Evelyn Carter, I am not a good man. I've done terrible things, and the empire I've built is soaked in blood and compromises. But you've made me want to be better. Made me believe that transformation is possible, even for someone like me. His voice roughened with emotion. I can't promise you safety. Can't guarantee that my past won't come back to haunt us. Can't even swear that I'll succeed in becoming someone truly worthy of you. But I can promise that I will never stop trying, that I will choose you over the empire, over safety, over everything, that loving you is the only thing I've ever done that feels completely right. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. Adrian, I'm not asking you to marry the criminal I was. I'm asking you to marry the man I'm trying to become, to be my partner in building something real from the ruins of everything I've destroyed. He took a shaky breath. Marry me, Evelyn. Say you'll stand beside me while I finish tearing down this empire and building something worthy of the future we could have together. Evelyn looked at this man kneeling before her, powerful and vulnerable, ruthless and tender, everything contradictory and impossible and somehow exactly right. She thought about the woman she'd been on New Year's Eve, invisible and desperate, dying in the snow because she'd believed her worth was measured in sacrifices no one noticed. She thought about the woman she'd become, scarred and complicated and carrying moral weights that would never fully lift, but visible and valued, and chosen by someone who'd moved heaven and earth to prove she mattered. The choice wasn't between good and evil. It was between safety and significance, between the comfortable fiction of a normal life and the terrifying reality of loving someone whose transformation would be the work of years. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Adrian's relief was physical, his whole body sagging as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was standing, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a desperation that suggested he genuinely feared she might say no. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love you, and I swear I will spend the rest of my life earning this. I love you too, and I'm terrified and have no idea how this will work, but I love you. They held each other in the office where it had all started, and Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. She didn't think she'd ever have complete peace again, but acceptance. Understanding that loving Adrian meant living with complexity, meant accepting that people could be terrible and wonderful simultaneously, meant building a life in the space between redemption and damnation. The final operation shut down in month 14, 2 months ahead of the 18-month timeline Evelyn had demanded. Karen Zhao presented the documentation with visible relief, every illegal revenue stream closed or legitimized, every dollar of dirty money cleaned and invested, every outstanding debt settled. We're done, she said simply. The empire is completely legitimate. Everything that remains can withstand any investigation. Adrian looked at the reports, then at Evelyn, then back at Karen. What's our profit margin compared to before? Down 40%, but sustainable and growing. The legitimate businesses are actually performing better without the criminal operations creating liability. Karen allowed herself a small smile. We might actually be more successful in 5 years than we ever were before. And the people we transitioned out? 92% successfully placed in legitimate employment. The remaining 8% chose retirement with the severance packages you provided. No one fell through the cracks. It was victory, but Adrian's expression showed no triumph, just exhaustion and relief and the lingering trauma of 2 years spent dismantling everything he'd built. After Karen left, Evelyn moved to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind as he stared at the documents that represented the death of his empire. "You did it," she said quietly. "You actually did it." "We did it. This was never just me." Adrian turned in her embrace. "Are you okay? With how it ended? With the cost?" Evelyn considered the question honestly. 3 people had died during the transformation, Rodriguez and 2 others who'd tried to resist. Dozens had lost income they depended on. Families had been disrupted. Communities had been affected. But hundreds had been transitioned to legitimate work. Thousands would no longer live under the shadow of criminal enterprise. And one man had proven that transformation was possible even from the darkest starting points. "I'm not okay," she said. "I carry the weight of every decision we made, every compromise we accepted, every person who suffered because I demanded acceleration. I don't think I'll ever be completely okay again." "Evelyn, but I'm here. I chose this. I chose you. And I'd make the same choice again because the alternative was watching you operate that empire for years, knowing I could have pushed for change and didn't." She met his eyes. "We did terrible things to achieve something better. That's the truth we'll live with. But at least we're living with it together." Adrian pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony at the estate, with only Chen, Dr. Reeves, Karen, and a few others who'd survived the transformation in attendance. No grand celebration, no society announcement, just 2 people promising to build a future together despite every reason it shouldn't work. Evelyn wore simple white, and Adrian wore the expression of a man who couldn't quite believe his luck. When they exchanged vows, she promised to love him through the transformation that would never fully end, and he promised to be worthy of her faith even when he failed. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. 5 years later, Evelyn stood in the same office where she'd once been invisible, looking at the city spread out beneath her. The office had changed, now the headquarters of Voss Enterprises, a completely legitimate corporation with holdings in real estate, technology, and investment management. The kind of company that showed up in business journals and corporate rankings without criminal asterisks. Adrian came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "That night, the snow. How close I came to dying because I was trying to prove my worth to someone who already saw me. I think about it too. Think about what I almost lost because I was too much of a coward to admit what you meant." Evelyn turned in his arms, studying the face that had become more familiar than her own. There was still hardness there, still shadows of the criminal he'd been. But there was also warmth, vulnerability, the evidence of a man who'd torn himself apart and rebuilt into something better. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Giving up the empire, the power, the fear that made you untouchable?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering seriously. "I regret that people died during the transition. Regret that it took nearly losing you to make me change. Regret that I can't go back and be someone worthy of you from the beginning." He cupped her face. "But regret the transformation itself? Regret choosing you over the empire? Never. Even though we're not perfect? Even though I still carry guilt and you still have enemies and we're both working every day to be better than we were? Especially because of that. Because perfect is boring, and what we have is real." His thumb brushed her cheek. "You taught me that being seen is better than being feared. That love is worth more than power. That transformation is possible even when it costs everything. I didn't teach you that. You figured it out yourself. You made me want to figure it out. That's the same thing." Evelyn smiled, standing on her toes to kiss him. I love you, Adrian Voss. Former criminal, current businessman, and the man who ran into a blizzard to save someone he was too afraid to admit he loved. I love you too, Evelyn Voss. Former invisible assistant, current partner, and the woman who demanded I be better and refused to accept anything less. They stood there together, no longer invisible, no longer untouchable, just two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something real from the ruins. Outside, the city continued its chaotic dance. Somewhere people were making the same mistakes they'd made, choosing safety over significance, fear over love, comfortable lies over painful truth. But in this office, in this moment, Adrian and Evelyn had proven that transformation was possible, that love could survive moral complexity, that two broken people could choose each other and build something that wasn't perfect, but was honest. And as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, they held each other and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Not because it was easy, not because it was guaranteed to work, but because they looked at each other with complete honesty. All the darkness and light, all the failure and hope, all the terrible and wonderful truth of who they were and chosen love anyway. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.